Somewhere under a mountain in central Iran, there's a secret the regime thought would stay buried forever. New information just came out, and it confirms something far bigger than anyone expected. The very weapon Iran built to protect itself might now be the thing that brings the whole system down. For months, this site, known as Pickaxe Mountain, was just a name people whispered in reports and satellite analysis. A hidden facility dug deep into solid rock, believed to be holding Iran's most dangerous material. But now, new details have come out that confirm what was once just a theory. And once you understand what has actually been disclosed, you will see why so many people are calling this Iran's biggest gamble and why that gamble is now falling apart in front of the whole world. Let's go back to where this really started. In the summer of 2025, the United States and Israel launched a massive combined strike against Iran's nuclear program. That event is now remembered as the 12-Day War. American bombers flew long distances to drop the heaviest bunker-busting bombs in the American arsenal on 3 major nuclear sites. For a short time, the world believed Iran's nuclear program had been wiped out completely. Buildings were destroyed, power systems were gone. Experts openly said Iran's program had been set back for years. But here is the detail that changes everything. Before those bombs ever landed, satellite images showed unusual truck movement near one of the tunnel entrances, vehicles going in and out in the days right before the strike happened. People who study satellite images for a living now believe Iran had already started moving its most important material before a single bomb fell. Well, think about what that actually means. Iran was not caught off guard. It saw the attack coming, and it protected the one thing it valued the most, a stockpile of uranium enriched to 60%, which is a short technical step away from weapons-grade material. So the strikes happened, buildings were destroyed, but the material that matters most is believed to have survived, moved somewhere the bombs never touched. And that decision is where this entire story really begins. After that, Iran faced a choice. Reports coming out of Tehran say Iran's supreme leader gave a direct order. The uranium stays inside the country no matter what. No peace deal, no pressure from Washington, no matter how badly the economy suffers. The material does not leave Iranian soil. At the exact same time, American officials were telling their allies that any real peace deal would require that uranium to be shipped out completely and placed somewhere safe and verified. Two sides, two opposite positions, both refusing to move. And that one disagreement is the seed of everything that has happened since. Here is the problem for Iran. The moment the world learned that a stockpile of near-weapons-grade uranium was hidden somewhere inside the country, every intelligence agency on the planet got one single mission. Find it, track it, make sure it never becomes a weapon. That uranium is no longer leverage for Iran. It has become a target painted directly onto Iranian territory. So where does the world believe this material actually is right now? All signs point to Pickaxe Mountain, a facility Iran first described years ago as a simple replacement site after an earlier location was damaged. On paper, it sounded like a small rebuilding project. In reality, satellite analysts have watched this site grow for years into something far bigger and far more protected than anyone expected. This is where the real disclosure begins. Because what has just been confirmed about this mountain, its depth, its structure, and what it might actually be hiding, is about to change how the entire world sees this standoff. And once you understand what is buried under that mountain, you will understand exactly why Iran's gamble may be backfiring right in front of everyone. Picture a vault so deep that even the most advanced bomb in the American arsenal might not be able to crack it open. That is not a movie scene. That is the real engineering problem sitting in front of military planners right now, and it all centers on one mountain in central Iran. The site is called Pickaxe Mountain, translated from its local name, Kolang Gazla. It sits just south of the Natanz enrichment complex, the same complex hit back in 2025. Iran first told international inspectors about construction at this location years ago, describing it as a simple replacement facility after Natanz suffered earlier sabotage. On paper, it sounded like routine rebuilding. In reality, satellite analysts have tracked this site for years, watching it grow into something far larger and far more hardened than a repair project ever needs to be. Independent researchers now estimate the facility is buried somewhere close to 100 meters underground, tunneled directly into solid granite rock. That detail matters more than people realize. Granite is nothing like the softer rock that surrounded the site's hit in 2025. It is dense, tough, and exactly the kind of ground you would choose if your entire goal was surviving an American bunker-busting bomb. And that is the exact headache facing military planners today. The bomb used in the 2025 strikes, the 30,000-pound bunker buster, known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, was built to punch through concrete and rock to destroy deeply buried targets. But multiple weapons experts have openly questioned whether even that bomb can reliably reach a target sitting under 100 meters of solid granite. There have reportedly been internal discussions about using 2 of these bombs back to back. One bomb to crack open the rock, and a second bomb to actually punch through to the depth where the material may be stored. It is less like a single knockout hit and more like breaking into a reinforced vault. You do not hit it once and hope for the best. You soften it first, then follow through with the real blow. The political language around this site has matched the seriousness of the engineering problem. Reports say the president has told reporters directly, in plain and simple language, that the United States will be striking Pickaxe Mountain, describing it as something that will happen very soon, and adding that there is nothing Iran can do to stop it. That is not careful diplomatic wording. That is a leader publicly placing a countdown clock over a mountain. Iran's response has followed a familiar pattern. State media has warned that any strike on this facility would be treated as a full expansion of the war. Security officials have promised what they call a devastating response if the United States follows through. But here is where honesty matters. Iran has been promising devastating responses since this phase of the conflict reignited earlier this year. And so far, the actual retaliation has mostly amounted to intercepted missiles, an occasional downed drone, and state television claims that outside observers simply cannot verify. The word devastating is carrying a heavy load in that sentence, and the results on the ground have not matched the volume of the threats. What makes this disclosure so significant is not just the depth of the mountain or the size of the bombs involved. It is what this reveals about Iran's entire strategy. Every choice made here, building deeper, staying quiet about what is actually stored inside, refusing outside verification, was designed to buy time and to protect leverage. But once the world confirms what is really buried under that mountain, that leverage starts working in reverse. The deeper Iran hides this material, the more justified the pressure becomes to keep striking until the question is settled one way or another. And that shift from hidden advantage to public liability is exactly what turns this from a simple military standoff into something far bigger. Because once the world understands what is actually at stake underneath that mountain, the next question becomes impossible to avoid. What happens to Iran when the very secret it built to survive becomes the reason everything around it starts to collapse? Here is a question worth sitting with for a second. What happens when the one thing a government refuses to give up becomes the exact reason its entire economy collapses? That is not a hypothetical anymore. That is exactly what is happening to Iran right now, and it all traces back to one buried stockpile of uranium. Let's look at the real choices sitting in front of Iran's leadership. Option 1, move the uranium out of the country as part of a genuine settlement. The supreme leader has already directly forbidden this. Doing it would also mean admitting publicly that Iran has been hiding the material's exact location and amount for close to a year, since inspectors have not had verified access to it since before the original strikes. Option 2, leave it buried under the mountain and hope depth and rock are enough to keep it safe. That is a bet against the entire direction. American bunker-busting technology is heading a direction that is being pushed forward specifically because of this mountain. Option 3, dilute the material themselves, bringing it down from a dangerous enrichment level back towards something closer to ordinary reactor fuel. Iran's own foreign minister has floated this idea before in past talks. But doing it in a way anyone believes requires either letting inspectors in to confirm it, something the regime has refused, or simply claiming they did it without proof, which nobody in Washington or Vienna is willing to accept given the track record so far. None of those three paths work in Iran's favor. And that is exactly the trap. This is not a trap built entirely from outside. It is a trap built mostly out of Iran's own decisions. Keep the material, hide its location, refuse outside verification, and then watch as every one of those choices becomes the exact justification the world uses to keep the pressure going until the material is either found or the government hiding it runs out of room to maneuver. While that standoff plays out underground, the damage above ground has already started spreading fast. Before hostilities escalated earlier this year, Iran was exporting close to 2 million barrels of oil a day. Within a few months, that number collapsed to almost nothing. Independent economic estimates suggest the ongoing blockade alone could wipe out around 70% of Iran's total export income, with daily losses running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Oh, that is not a number any government recovers from with a defiant speech on state television. Iran's currency has lost most of its value. Inflation estimates run anywhere from 50 to nearly 70%, depending on the source. Some economic forecasts suggest Iran's economy could shrink by more than 6% this year alone. When a government's money runs this short, cracks start to show in places that used to stay quiet. There have been reports of investors clashing with security forces, healthcare workers striking over unpaid wages, and retirees protesting in multiple cities. The regime's response has reportedly followed the same pattern each time: mass arrests, crackdowns, and silence. At one point, state television reportedly cut away from a live broadcast mid-sentence, which tends to suggest something was said publicly that officials did not want people to hear. Even hardline factions tied to the Revolutionary Guard have reportedly called the earlier diplomatic agreement a straight-up betrayal, which tells you something important. The cracks are no longer only between the regime and its people. They are forming inside the regime itself. None of this is happening in isolation either. Iran's regional allies have reportedly been trying to open new pressure points elsewhere to relieve some of the strain, while accusations of outside assistance to Iran's targeting efforts have added another layer of uncertainty to an already tense picture. Every one of these threads circles back to the same central problem, a stockpile of uranium the regime refuses to give up, sitting at the center of a war it cannot decisively win, an economy in genuine free fall, and internal accusations tearing at its own unity from within. Iran built itself into a corner using its own uranium and its own silence. And the walls of that corner are not staying still. They're closing in a little more with every single day this standoff continues. Imagine a chessboard where one player still has pieces left to move, but has already lost control of the center. That is the clearest way to understand where Iran stands right now. Every option left on the board comes with a cost, and the clock keeps ticking whether the regime is ready or not. Iran's entire strategy through this conflict seems to rest on one simple bet: outlast American political will, absorb the strikes, keep the tough talk loud, and drag things out long enough that pressure inside the United States eventually forces a pullback or a softer deal. Historically, that is not a foolish plan. Plenty of governments have worn down American patience over a long enough timeline before. But this time, the clock is working against Iran in a way it has not in past conflicts. And the reason comes back to the same uranium question running through this entire story. Every week that stockpile remains unaccounted for by international inspectors gives Washington a fresh reason to keep the pressure on, no matter how political winds shift at home. This is not a headline that fades after a news cycle or two. It is an ongoing, verifiable argument that renews itself. Every single day it stays unresolved. Meanwhile, the economic math keeps getting worse for Iran, not better. A country exporting almost no oil, watching its currency collapse and facing protests from its own investor class, its own healthcare workers, and its own retirees, does not have years to quietly wait this out while rebuilding underground. Every month this drags on. The eventual rebuild gets longer. The debt gets deeper. And the room for hardliners to keep insisting on defiance instead of compromise gets smaller. Eventually, a government runs out of money to pay the very security forces keeping protesters off the streets in the first place. There's also a quieter question that regional analysts have started raising, one that rarely makes headlines but matters just as much long-term: succession. Iran's supreme leader is in his mid-80s. Analysts have openly discussed a range of outcomes if leadership were to change during all of this. Everything from a continuation of the current system to a shift toward a more military-led government to, in more hopeful scenarios, some kind of real political opening. Nobody can say for certain which path eventually plays out. But this uranium standoff is not happening separately from that leadership question. A government under this much military, economic, and internal pressure, led by a man whose eventual exit will trigger its own power. Struggle is not operating from a position of strength. It is operating from a position of trying to survive one crisis at a time, hoping the next one does not arrive before the last one is even settled. So where does this actually go from here? If Pickaxe Mountain does eventually get struck, and every signal coming out of Washington suggests that is a matter of when rather than if, the real question becomes whether the uranium is even still there by the time the bombs fall. It could already have been moved again to some location nobody is currently tracking. It could remain exactly where analysts believe it is, protected by depth and rock that may or may not hold up. Either outcome keeps this story moving. If the material survives intact, Iran still faces the exact same problem it has right now: an unverified stockpile that keeps justifying pressure indefinitely. If it gets destroyed or buried beyond recovery in a strange way that actually resolves the single biggest sticking point in this entire conflict, though it would likely come with serious environmental and political fallout, and would almost certainly trigger whatever response Iran has been promising for months. Either way, the pattern the world has been watching does not look like it is slowing down. It looks like it is speeding up. Iran made its defining bet the moment it decided to keep that uranium hidden inside the country instead of handing it over as part of a real settlement. It gambled that secrecy would give it leverage. Instead, that secrecy has become the single biggest reason the pressure keeps mounting instead of easing. So here's the question worth sitting with. Do you think Pickaxe Mountain gets struck in the next few weeks, or does this drag into a much longer standoff? Do you think the regime eventually hands that material over, or would they rather let the whole structure collapse before admitting they were sitting on it the whole time? Drop your answer below, because right now, nobody outside a small circle of intelligence officials actually knows for certain.